Hi guys. I said I would do like a summary video of what happened during the murder trial for the murderers of Ian Watkins. So here we are. So just to give a bit of background context, so Ian Watkins was the former lead singer of Welsh band Lost Prophets, and he was sentenced to 29 years for 13 child sex offences following a trial in 2013. After those 29 years, he was also, as part of his sentence, he had a further 6 years on licence. Watkins was housed in Wakefield Prison. It's one of Britain's most secure prisons, housing some of the country's most notorious and dangerous offenders. There was quite a divide in the prison. There is often violent friction between the general population prisoners and those convicted of sexual offences. This attack in 2025 on Ian Watkins was not the first. He was stabbed in the neck after being held hostage for 6 hours back in 2023 as well. Also, literally in the weeks after Watkins was murdered, another offender was murdered after being stabbed 30 times. So, yeah, it's very notorious. The incident itself, it happened on the 11th of October 2025. It took place in cell block B at Wakefield, unfolding within just 20 minutes of the morning unlocking, which gives a very narrow, calculated window of opportunity. The weapon used was a makeshift knife fashioned from a blade fixed to a handle made of plastic cutlery, constructed covertly inside the prison, also known as a shiv. The perpetrators. So firstly, we got 25-year-old Rico Goodell. Goodell was already serving a life sentence for murder at the time of the attack. He pleaded not guilty to the murder of Ian Watkins and to the possession of a bladed weapon. And then we have Samuel Dodsworth, who's 44. Dodsworth was in prison for repeatedly raping a woman. He was the alleged accomplice, accused of disposing the weapon following the stabbing. He also pleaded not guilty to murder and to the associated weapon charge. Both defendants entered not guilty pleas and faced trial at Leeds Crown Court. Okay. So the attack itself, Watkins was stabbed 3 times in the head and the neck. There's no evidence of provocation because there were no defensive injuries found. And CCTV shows weapon was passed between defendants. The prosecution built their case on a combination of forensic findings and surveillance footage. The absence of defensive injuries indicated Watkins had no opportunity to resist, which was central to the Crown's argument of a premeditated one-sided assault. The motive. So, Goodell claimed Watkins was targeted simply because he occupied the adjacent cell, a matter of circumstance, not personal acquaintance. Ideology. Goodell openly admitted to harbouring a deep hatred of sex offenders, stating, "This is what paedophiles deserve." And infamy. After the attack, Goodell allegedly told prison staff, if I've killed him, you could be talking to someone famous. So, a legal stance. Mr. Justice Hilliard noted that there was no dispute that Goodell caused Watkins' death. The question before the jury was one of intent and culpability. The prosecution. The Crown firmly asserted that, however grave Watkins' own crimes were, they provided no lawful justification for his killing. And the defence, they argued that Goodell's legal team Goodell's legal team argued that he had been set up by prison officers who, aware of his views on sex offenders, deliberately placed him near Watkins. I will just say, because I feel like this point needs making. I think that is that's not a very good, not a very strong argument from Goodell's legal team, because on the one side he is arguing that he's been set up by prison officers because of his views on sex offenders, and the fact that he was deliberately placed near Watkins. He's basically saying, well, it's not my fault. The prison has some responsibility here. They knew my views on sex offenders. However, his accomplice is a sex offender, so make of that what you will. I think that's where, for me, that's where the argument falls apart is, okay, you have a view on sex offenders. That doesn't justify killing one, but also you worked with one. And that was actually Dodsworth. His argument as well is, why would I kill a sex offender when I'm one myself? Before I get to this, actually, we have some footage of the CCTV. Yeah, there's no sound on this, but this shows Watkins coming out of his cell shortly after he stabbed. So that's Goodell walking away. In a minute on the left, you will see Watkins coming out of his cell. People just seem to be walking by him, even though he's covered in blood, which is just fascinating. Okay. It's worth noting as well, just before we move to what happened at the end of the trial, they talked about the injuries that Ian Watkins sustained. So there were 3 cuts to his face and neck. Now, one of them was just over 4 centimeters long, cutting through the upper part of his right ear. And then there was another cut which was 11 centimeters long on the left side of his face, running from behind the left eye down to the jawline. And then a third, which was 10.5 centimeters long on the left side of his neck, running from behind and below the left ear down his neck. The one in particular on his neck was the 10.5 centimeter long one, was 4 centimeters wide, and it exposed muscle tissues in the neck. And that was the fatal cut, actually, because it also cut into his voice box, which would have affected his breathing, and it cut into his jugular vein, which caused the significant external bleeding. So, yeah. Okay. So we go back to this. So at the end, after weeks and weeks of hearing evidence at Leeds Crown Court, the jury retired to begin deliberations. But before a verdict could be reached, the presiding judge took the significant step of discharging the jury entirely. So the case is officially collapsed, and there is a retrial which is scheduled for the 8th of February 2027. Now, we were not given the specific reason why that happened. But with my own knowledge and experience, my best guess is that a juror is compromised. Whether they've spoken to someone about the case, which they're not supposed to do, or posted stuff, or admitted to looking at stuff online, something has happened and the entire jury had to be discharged. So there's going to be a whole new trial. So we've got some developments here. So the trial began. Evidence was presented at Leeds Crown Court from late 2025 into spring 2026. The jury was discharged before a verdict was reached, and the retrial is scheduled for the 8th of February. Both defendants, are they going to remain in custody because they're serving prisoners already? The judge expressed clear reluctance in discharging the jury, underscoring the gravity of the decision and its consequences for the justice process. Now, he would have done that because something has happened which could have resulted in a mistrial or, could have given grounds for appeal. The principle at stake. So, and I feel like this is quite an important point. I come across people when I've been covering this case, and I understand the frustration, but a lot of people have said, oh, well, he deserved it, and almost champion these two men for killing Ian Watkins. And I get it. He's the lowest of the low, the worst kind of human we have. However, as a legal professional, I also believe that, we let justice take its course. He had been to a court, he had been handed a sentence, and he was serving it, whether we like it or not. We do not have the death sentence in this country anymore, and haven't done for a very long time. But I've had so many people saying, well, where can I send these guys money? They should be freed. They should be, they should be pardoned for their own crimes. Can we just take a moment and remember that their own crimes are, respectively, murder of someone else, a completely innocent man. In Goodell's case, that murder, it was mistaken identity. In Dodsworth's case, he repeatedly raped a young woman. Like, what kind of standard are we applying here? But I do, I think it just kind of needs to be simmered down. I mean, the other thing I've heard is, like Goodell and Dodsworth, by killing Watkins, they've saved, British taxpayers a fortune. Let me just debunk that. They haven't. We now have had one trial. The trial has now been discharged and is set for a whole new trial. So that's 2 trials we're paying for. In addition, Dodsworth wasn't serving a life sentence, but he is likely to now have his sentence extended. Compensation is going to be paid for Watkins' death to his family, because that's how that works. The prison failed to keep him safe. So, and the prison has a duty of care to every prisoner, including Goodell and Dodsworth. So they failed to keep Watkins safe. So now there will be a compensation payout to Watkins' family. To me, I think if, when you sort of saying, well, Goodell and Dodsworth, they've done this thing and now it saved the British taxpayers having to pay for a really evil man. I understand that. Wouldn't they have saved more money by not committing their own crimes and us having to pay for them? These are 2 men who are in prison. We're paying for 2 men. They would have saved us more money had they not committed their own crimes. So I just feel like there is a way that we handle things in the British justice system. And the way that Goodell and Dodsworth handled it is not the way. So, under British law, every prisoner, regardless of their offence, is entitled to protection by the state. The prosecution of Watkins' killers is not a defence of his crimes, it's a defence of the rule of law itself. The collapse of the trial has prolonged uncertainty for all parties and raised broader questions about the management of high-risk individuals within the prison estate. So, If we look at the timeline, October 2025, Watkins killed at Wakefield in a targeted attack. Late 2025, May 2026. Evidence was heard over multiple weeks at Leeds Crown Court. And then in May 2026, the jury was discharged before the verdict. The trial collapses. February 2027, retrial provisionally scheduled to begin. So, evidence of intent. The premeditation. Alleged pre-attack meetings between Goodell and Dodsworth suggest the assault was planned in advance, and I would agree with that because, as I said earlier, it's such a small window, and it was done within seconds. The execution. Goodell entered the cell concealing a hidden bundle. Dodsworth allegedly acted as a lookout outside. Disposal. The weapon was wrapped in tissue and discarded immediately after the stabbing to destroy evidence. The role of prison security. So, CCTV and body-worn camera footage proved critical. They captured the passing of the weapon between defendants. Now, that wasn't in the CCTV footage that I just showed you, but that footage did show Goodell walking away from Watkins' cell and then Watkins emerging himself. There's also a bit of a clip as well of Goodell saying, "Have a good night's sleep, Watkins lad." So there's a few clips, but I just showed that one for now. Management. So the case has renewed debate about the risks of housing sex offenders in close proximity to the general prison population. And I'm sure that will be, further added to the murder of Carl Bevan, which was literally weeks after Watkins. That happened in November. And that is the inmate who he was serving prison for murdering his stepchild, a little toddler. He was stabbed 25 to 30 times. I'm not entirely sure of the exact number. He was stabbed, multiple times. Literally weeks after Watkins. He was in the A wing, I think it was. So I'm sure there will be a robust review after all of that. And then accountability. So ongoing investigations seek to establish how a makeshift weapon was constructed and retained undetected inside a high security wing. So where are we now? The case is at a legal standstill following the jury's discharge. Court proceedings are expected to reset fully for the retrial, provisionally beginning on the 8th of February 2027. A key unresolved question remains: the precise extent of Samuel Dodsworth's involvement and what charge. Now, Dodsworth, as I said, Dodsworth actually came out and said, "Well, why would I kill a sex offender? I'm one myself." That's quite a powerful statement to make. And we don't really know much about his involvement. Everything we see in the CCTV footage is Goodell. So, is Goodell kind of shifting some of the blame to Dodsworth, continuing his apparent hate of sex offenders? Because, as I said earlier, why would you then conspire with a type of person you hate so much to kill another person of the same class who you hate so much? So the pending questions: was Dodsworth an active accomplice or a bystander? Did prison officers' placement of Goodell near Watkins constitute negligence? I'm not convinced by that at all. Goodell said the night before, because he was transferred from another wing, and he didn't want to be transferred, and he actually said, "I will kill any amount of." I can't remember if it was pedophiles or prisoners. He said, "But I will kill any amount of, essentially people, until I get moved back." So he'd already put out the threat that he would kill inmates. Overlooking that may have been where there was negligence. Not taking that threat seriously may have been negligence. But placing him near Watkins specifically, I'm not sure. And then, will new evidence emerge before the retrial commences? That's my other pending question. So, the conclusion: the justice system integrity. A fair trial must proceed regardless of the victim's character. The rule of law demands no less. Accountability. Those responsible for acts of prisoner violence must be held to account through the full rigour of the courts. And then the final outlook. The 2027 retrial represents the last avenue for resolution in one of Britain's most high-profile prison violence cases. So I will update if anything happens between now and February next year. I don't think it much will. There were, I think, 2 other people arrested for this crime. There was nothing mentioned about those people in the trial, so I'm not sure where we are with them. It sounds like no charges are being brought. But yeah, that's what happened with the first attempt of trial. So I will be back for the next trial.